Released in 1998 and developed by Squaresoft, Parasite Eve was Square's first game to be rated M. Produced by the absolute legend Hironobu Sakaguchi and directed by Takashi Tokita, the game is a sequel to a novel, also called Parasite Eve, written by Hideaki Senna. Thankfully, we don't need to have read the novel as it wasn't translated until 2005. The game will cover the important plot beats from the novel, but if you enjoy reading, I can highly recommend the book. The game received some pretty decent critical praise and currently sits in the 80s on Metacritic. The main issue that reviewers had were the lack of voice acting and the relatively short playtime with little replay value. I can understand these criticisms, but at the same time, Resident Evil released in 1996, and I think we can all remember the caliber of the voice acting there. I personally didn't play the game on release as Parasite Eve didn't even get a European release. Instead, in the early 2000s, a friend of mine acquired Parasite Eve 1 and 2, and we played those quite heavily. While chatting with that friend on Discord, I mentioned I was thinking about covering Parasite Eve on the channel, and he said that he'd be very interested to see it, so here we are. Let's fire it up and see how it goes. The game begins like all of the RPG greats, with a night at the theatre. If you can figure out what other game I'm probably alluding to here, pop your guess down in the comments. We're introduced to our protagonist, Brea. She's an NYPD officer, and she's 25. We have a nameless date with us to enjoy the Christmas Eve performance, but something goes very, very wrong. Just watch. So for some reason, while the opera singer was singing, pretty much everybody spontaneously combusted, except for Aya. Very strange. Let's just get this out of the way. Aya moves painfully slowly. While the game is already painfully short, the vast majority of that length comes from just how long it takes for Aya to move across the screen. As we approach the singer, she tells us that Aya's cells are trying to communicate, and then combat starts. The combat is actually a very fun feeling system. We have free movement in the battle area, and as you can see in the top left we have an AT bar, HP and PE. If you've played a Square RPG from this time, you might be familiar with the ATB system, but I'll explain it for those who aren't. When the AT bar fills, we are free to attack. We can move around while it's filling to dodge attacks, but we can only shoot, use our PE, or items when the bar is full. When we go to attack, we get this dome around Aya that symbolises her range. Anything in the dome will take the hit and take full damage. Anything outside the dome will either dodge the attack or take severely reduced damage. It's a simple battle system, but considering most RPGs at the time were static, wait for your turn style battles, it's nice that we have some movement and it's actually important to use that. Looking at you, Dragon Quest XI. Aya's parasite energy also awakens during this battle, and that's what the PE bar is for. Currently she only has a heal, but as she levels up she'll have a lot more uses for the bar. The battle ends with a conversation where the singer introduces herself as Eve, and says that Aya should be able to remember her. After the battle, we get a brief flash of what looks like a young Aya in a hospital, and Eve floats away. We follow and find a big hole waiting in the wings. Aya, being a woman of action, jumps down to pursue Eve. We see the same girl from the vision before who laughs, runs away, and fades from view. Then we get a pretty gnarly cutscene of a rat transforming and, yeah, the mature rating makes sense now. Square's CGI department has always been one of its major strong points, and Parasite Eve is no exception to that rule. We meet this clown fella who follows Aya's evacuation order and dies when he runs outside. Smooth moves, Aya. If you see a phone with a red light on it at any point, like this one, then you've found one of the game's save points. If you've followed the channel at all recently, then you'll know I've not been making a habit of saving my games often, and I've lost hours of progress while making these brief looks, so trust me, I'm saving at every one of these. I spent some time going through the different rooms looking for items and such before I actually found the way to progress. The corpse bent over the desk here actually has a key that we need to continue, and I thought I'd already tried interacting with it, but I must have missed the sweet spot the first time around. It's also a little bit devious because the corpse falls on the first interaction, and to actually get the key you have to interact with it while it's on the floor. That just feels a little bit mean, but things like this don't happen too often throughout the game. Using the key, we find Melissa's diary. It mentions that she's had to take a lot of medication and that over the days leading up to the big performance, she felt herself burning up more and more. Finally, we learn that Suzanne, the other actress she was up against for the role, died in an apartment fire. Opening night, the one before this one, apparently went smoothly, and Melissa seems to have a performance in Central Park for the next day. We get another key, and go use that. Oh hey, a parrot. Oh no, we have to kill the parrot. Enemies really don't take much time to kill at this point in the game. In the rehearsal room, we find Melissa playing the piano, and sadly, Eve's takeover has finished. Or as Eve puts it, nucleic domination has finally come to an end once and for all. Another pretty cool cutscene plays out as Melissa's body transforms into Eve, and Eve declares that the day for the mitochondria to be free has arrived. The fight starts, and it's honestly the first real fight of the game. Eve also has lasers. We do not have lasers. Parasite energy slowly recovers over time while you're in combat, so for the most part you don't need a whole lot of healing items. Eve tells us we need more time until our mitochondria are truly free. We see some more of the hospital flashback, now with a doctor, and when we return to Aya, Eve has gone. Behind the piano, we find another hole in the floor, and Aya shows no hesitation in jumping down. Every RPG needs a sewer environment, right? We make our way through the sewer until eventually we see the little girl run through a door. I'll quickly talk about the inventory mechanics because, to be frank, they're terrible. We can currently hold a max of 13 items. This includes our weapons, armor, items, and key items. Our limit will go up as we level up, and there's one other way to increase it that I'll talk about later, but you can't hoard items in Parasite Eve. You don't have the slots for it. We catch up with Eve, and Aya's body begins to burn up again. Eve cracks a brilliant joke about how Aya's ready to fight her alone, which is a good thing as everyone else would just be combusted. She says she's going to give us some time to think and some time to evolve, and we get this delightful cutscene of her leaving by turning into goo and just schlepping straight through the gate. Tasty. Also, a mutant alligator. Resident Evil 2 did come out 2 months before Parasite Eve, but I don't suspect any foul play here from Square. I think it's just a coincidence. The alligator fight is simple enough. Dodge the projectiles and shoot the gator. Healing is needed. I do quickly want to talk about the soundtrack for the game. Composed by Yoko Shimomura, she received acclaim for creating an inorganic and emotionless soundtrack, which seems like a weird compliment, but I do think she did some really fine work on this soundtrack. You might know of Yoko from her work on Kingdom Hearts, Street Fighter 2, or the Mario & Luigi RPG series, but she always delivers a top-notch soundtrack, and it's fun to hear some of her earlier work. After killing the alligator, Aya returns to the surface only to have a camera shoved in her face and to be bombarded with questions. But don't worry though, because her partner, and absolute legend, Daniel comes in and just bloody decks the reporter. Aya asks why Daniel, a father, is working on Christmas Eve, and he just says that his son understands that his dad is a cop. We get this nice little fly-through of New York City while Aya talks about how this incident marked the start of the 6 days that were to become a nightmare for all, and we get our end-of-day splash screen. Parasite Eve does indeed play out over 6 days, and each day will take roughly an hour or two to complete if you're going at a decent pace. At the end of each day, we're given the opportunity to save before the next day starts. Day 2 starts out with us in the NYPD station. Daniel tells us that Melissa had no family or close friends and was sick constantly. Aya informs everyone that it wasn't a case of mass spontaneous combustion and that the victims were actually set on fire. Baker, the police chief, says he's authorizing better firepower to solve the case and gives us a mod permit. Heading down to the weapons room, we meet Wayne, who is very enthusiastic about guns. Teasing us with the options of things like shotguns and rocket launchers, he's cut off by Torres, who preaches that guns are to be used only for protection. He gives us a rifle and lets us add a mod slot to it. Let's quickly talk about equipment customization. While exploring, you can frequently find little weapon or armor upgrades that you can add on to any weapon. Things that will add a small amount of stats to your gun, like +2 range or +1 attack. Weapons and armor also have mod slots. I'll be honest, I don't really know what any of the mods do, and they're completely ignorable for the main game. We can use consumable tools to pass certain things over from gun to gun or armor to armor. You can pass a mod over if you have an empty mod slot, or you can pass a certain amount of stats from one to another. The gun or armor you're transferring from is consumed during this process. For the purposes of playing the game casually, you can just transfer things that give decent stat increases and ignore the rest of the system. Wayne also functions as our storage. We can leave anything we want with Wayne except for a few key items. Unfortunately, that means if you ever want to deposit or withdraw something, you have to come all the way back to the NYPD station, and I just couldn't be bothered to do this, so I only stored things when I was sent here by the game. He also has an option to get rid of junk. Junk is an actual item that you'll find from time to time, and if you deposit silly amounts of it with Wayne, he'll eventually give you some goodies. Personally, I'd rather have the inventory space, so if I ever got any junk, I'd just discard it. Before leaving the station, we bump into Ben, Daniel's son. He's come to the station to try and get Daniel to come to a concert in Central Park. Now, we know that Melissa was meant to be performing at Central Park today, but for some reason, Aya doesn't think to tell Daniel this. Daniel says he can't make it, and Ben runs off. Baker tells us that we have to go to a press conference talking about the fire at the opera. Baker doesn't handle the conference well, and the reporters directly ask Aya how she survived, and well, Aya tells them about Eve, the mitochondria, and what's happened. Back in Baker's office, a call comes through saying that a scientist from Japan wants to come and talk about what's happening. Nix, one of our fellow officers, tells us that a researcher at the Museum of Natural History wrote a new theory about mitochondria, and Aya and Daniel decide to go for a quick chat with them. At the museum, we meet Dr. Clamp. He looks a little bit shady and is super ignorant, choosing to carry on with his work rather than help with the investigation. When Aya gets a good look at the doctor's face, she has another flashback. It seems Dr. Clamp was involved when Aya was in the hospital. Clamp begins to talk about the true mitochondria, explaining that it's actually a separate organism with its own agenda. There's a lot of medical terminology being thrown around in this game, so I'm obviously going to paraphrase things a little bit because I'm an idiot. He mentions that the root of all humanity could be traced back to a single woman in Africa, which has become known as Mitochondria Eve. Clamp seems shocked that the suspect also called herself Eve. He returns to his studies and tells us to leave. While driving back to the station, Daniel receives a call that there's a break in the case. What was that break? That Melissa has a concert in Central Park tonight, and that people were still gathering despite what happened. Daniel runs off to save his son, and Aya follows after. At Central Park, Daniel tries to go after Ben but starts to ignite, so Aya volunteers to go in his place. Now, before we get to an utterly baffling design decision in this area, let's talk about the final bit of player customization, the BP system. When you level up, you're given an amount of BP. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to the amount of BP you get. At first you'll get a limited amount, but one level up later on in the game, I got about 600 BP, and then the next level gave me about 150 BP, so it's not just a scale. Anyway, we can spend that BP in the BP menu. We can spend it on our stats or our gun's stats. Each level, wherever we put it, costs 100 BP. We can upgrade our AT, giving us faster attacking opportunities, or, confoundingly, we can upgrade our inventory space. This is the other method of increasing the inventory size I mentioned earlier. You can spend your rather limited BP on it. I don't really get why you would. You can spend your BP on killing things faster, or holding more items. I know which one I'd pick. We can also increase our gun stats, but I wanted a nice speedy Aya first, so the vast majority of my BP goes into that. Now, in order to progress through here, we need the zoo key. But there's something very, very weird with obtaining the zoo key, and when I looked this up on the internet, it just doesn't have a concrete strategy for it. The key is supposed to be in the desk in the early save room in the area, but sometimes it's just not there. The advice given, if this happens, is to just wander around for a while, loot some chests, kill some enemies, and then check again, because the key might be there now. I wish that I was kidding. Apparently this key just isn't there sometimes. And naturally, I checked this room pretty early and lo and behold, it wasn't there. So I scoured the rest of the area until I eventually resorted to checking a guide and finding out about the key. I don't know why this is a thing. I don't know why anyone thought it was a good idea. It's clearly not, and it's just bad game design. With the key finally in our midst, we can move on to the concert area, and Eve is there, and she's got some plans for the people at the concert. Every concert goer is turned into slime. Ick. Aya decides that she has to get backstage to confront Eve, so we head to this door, conveniently marked backstage. Eve runs off saying that we won't ruin her plans again, and Aya gives chase. I'll cut out most of the chase since it's about 10 minutes of walking and fighting enemies, but check out this mutated polar bear enemy who shoots lightning. Wild. The boss for this area are these giant worms. They're easy enough, just wait for them to pop up, shoot them a few times, dodge their attacks, and eventually you'll win. Eve then invites us on a carriage ride, and Aya hops in. What Eve didn't tell us was that she was going to set the goddamn horse on fire, and we then fight Eve while the carriage ride continues. This is, admittedly, pretty cool. I really like the top-down angle for this fight, and while it's not particularly challenging, it's a nice way to end off the second day. Eve asks Aya to team up with her to do something to the rest of the world's mitochondria, and the horse finally dies, causing the carriage to spin out of control and rendering Aya unconscious. We get another flashback to the hospital room with Dr. Clamp, and things switch to Daniel's perspective. Ben is safe, thankfully, but his mother was at the concert and has been turned into slime. Baker issues an evacuation order to try and keep the remaining citizens safe from Eve. Daniel, again, leaves Ben, but this time with a fellow officer who takes Ben to see one of the police dogs named Shiva. I hope nothing bad happens to Shiva. We're then shown a Japanese man trying to get through a police blockade, who seizes the opportunity to get through when one of the officers bursts into flames. And then Aya wakes up with the Japanese fella in an abandoned building. He introduces himself as Kunihiko Maeda, a scientist. Presumably this is the scientist who was trying to get in contact with us earlier. Daniel is here too, and that's always nice. Maeda talks about a prior incident, one that took place in Japan. This is what the original book was about. A prior incident to the New York incident that we're playing through now. It seems like people turning into slime is new though, and didn't happen then. The Japan incident started when a scientist's wife was in a car accident. The scientist tried to culture his wife's liver cells in order to keep her alive. The cells multiplied and the mitochondria took over his wife's body. Once Eve had a body, she acquired the scientist's sperm and tried to create an ultimate being. It seems that Eve needed a proper host as the wife's body was beginning to break down. The wife was also an organ donor. After the accident, her kidneys were transplanted into a girl who Eve then implanted a fertilized egg into, giving birth to an ultimate being. Maeda is shocked that Aya is completely unaffected by Eve's ignition power, causing Aya to have a little bit of a breakdown, thinking she must be a monster just like Eve. The day ends. Day 3 begins with some casual breaking and entering at a gun store and a pharmacy for some supplies, then Maeda asks to be taken to a place with a research facility as he wants to run an experiment. So naturally, the only one we know of is Dr. Clamp's room at the museum, and since there's been an evacuation order, it's not like he's using it, so that seems like the logical place to go, right? It seems Maeda scraped some samples from Aya's clothing while she slept, which is a little bit weird, and he wants to examine them. He mixes some of his blood with the cells from the sample, and we get this cutscene of Eve's mitochondria attacking the nucleus of his cells. Maya then takes a sample of Aya's blood and runs a similar test, but this time we see that the nucleus fights off Eve's mitochondria. Fascinating. He theorizes that Aya's mitochondria might have evolved and developed the power to rebel against Eve's mitochondria. Dr. Clamp then enters and demands to know why the group have broken and entered into his lab. Daniel finds a list that has his wife and son's name on it and threatens Clamp trying to find out why he has that list. As the group leave, Clamp mumbles that it's too late to do anything now. He definitely knows what's going on. On the way back to the NYPD, Maeda mentions that the list was a list of people who would be receptive to organ donations. At the NYPD, the place has been attacked and Aya feels like Eve is there. Before Aya heads off to explore, Maeda gives her a charm. From what I can tell, this charm, and the several others Maeda gives her as the game goes on, are completely useless and only serve to take up space in your inventory. Thanks, Maeda. Exploring the NYPD gives us a bit of loot and plenty of dead or dying officers to interact with. It seems Eve really wanted this place to be ruined. Even Torres, our friendly gunsmith, dies. Eve is going to pay for what she's done here. We check in on the kennel and see Kathy on the floor. She tells us that Shiva, the dog, went berserk and Ben went chasing after her. I don't like where this is going. As we explore further and further into the station, we get little flashes of Ben following Shiva deeper and deeper through the station. We do get a really fun moment, or at least I think it's pretty fun, where an enemy bursts through a mirror in the interrogation room. It's obvious that it's going to happen, but I just really like that it does. Baker is protecting Ben from Shiva, and yep, we get this cutscene of Shiva mutating. Again, this is actually a pretty gross scene. Before going to confront Shiva, we have a little bit of business with this mini-boss who apparently killed Torres. He has this weird purple area of effect attack that appears to do 50% of your current health and is, it seems, undodgeable, so that's nice. After avenging Torres, we head to where Baker and Ben are. We get this really nice Dutch angle as Aya makes her way to the room. And somehow, Baker and Ben are still alive. The Shiva fight is pretty easy, and there are 3 targets for us to take care of. I think you can just focus on the main head in this fight, but taking out the 2 side heads seem to reduce the amount of attacks it has. As long as you keep plinking away, dodging attacks where you can, and healing when needed, then Shiva will go down relatively easily. With Baker and Ben safe, Ben pleads with Aya to make whoever did this to Shiva pay. The day ends. As Baker is recovering from the attack on the station, Daniel is now the de facto chief. He wonders why Eve decided to attack the station, and a cop suggests that maybe Maeda may know more. So now we have to find Maeda with no hint as to where he is, and this just feels like time wasting. We basically have the whole game open to us, and there's nothing new at any of the locations, so we are just trying to find Maida. I wandered around for about half an hour before remembering a brief interaction I had with a lab tech while I was exploring the NYPD in the previous day, and sure enough, that's where Maida is. I really feel like they should have just mentioned that he was at the lab, or, you know, not let Aya leave the NYPD until she'd found Maida. Any kind of instruction more than just find Maida would have been nice, but Maida says that Eve attacking the station was probably just a distraction. Based on the Japan incident, Eve is probably looking for sperm to create another ultimate being. Daniel mentions that there's a doctor specialising in IVF at the nearby hospital, and Aya and Maida go to investigate. Daniel stays behind to do some digging into Dr. Clamp. At the hospital, Maida gives Aya another completely useless charm, taking up yet another inventory slot. Thanks, Maida. Aya sees the vision of the young girl again and thinks it might be Maya, her sister who died not long after the accident that killed their mother. While trying to ride the elevator, Eve messes with Aya by cutting the cables on the elevator, sending it crashing down to the basement. Eve also decides to cut the power so the other elevator can't be used. So we have this little section where we're trying to find fuses to fix the power problem. None of them are really hidden, and it's around this point that I realised what Parasite Eve really lacks compared to its other survival horror contemporaries. Puzzles. Parasite Eve just doesn't really have any. All it has is find key item, use key item. I'm not saying that every puzzle in a Resident Evil or Silent Hill game is good, but it's nice to have something with a bit more depth than just object hunting. After finding the 3 fuses, we can go to the fuse box and turn the power back on. Amusingly, we can cause Aya to give herself a hell of an electric shock at this point by turning the power on before fixing the wires. You'd think Aya would say, "No, I'm not doing that," but she tries to grab the live cable in regardless. I honestly thought I'd caused a game over, but she gets up and we can do the sequence correctly, turning the power back on. A door in the lobby that was locked before is now open, and that's enough of a reason for us to investigate. We save a nurse who asks us to save another nurse in the next room. The next room, however, is the room that Aya has been flashing back to this whole time. We appear to be getting close to discovering whatever happened here. Also, just take a look at this nurse's face. Good God, it's horrifying. Parasite Eve came out between Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII, and you can really see the beginnings of 8's model designs in Parasite Eve, but holy hell, this nurse's face. This is going to haunt me for longer than anything else in the game. The nurse gives us a key card and says the area unlocked is where the liquid nitrogen storage is. Going to use the key, we meet the previous nurse and Aya asks why the hospital uses liquid nitrogen. The main use, of course, is to keep the sperm bank from spoiling. Look, I'm an adult. I've managed to talk about sperm a few times in this video without devolving into childish humour, but Christ on a bike, Aya's reaction to this knocks my socks off. Sperm bank? Oh my god! Sure enough, we turn off the liquid nitrogen in the next room and head back to the elevator up to the 13th floor. After more exploring and killing, we come across some notes scattered on the floor and it's time to find out a little bit about what's going on. Patient records for Mariko Brea, Aya's mother, taken in with Maya Brea after an accident, died from cardiac arrest. Melissa Pierce, brought in on the same day that Maya was in the hospital and operated on the same day. We also find a key for the elevator outside this room under the notes, but my inventory was full, so I had to discard something, read the notes again, then pick the key up. It seems the Navy has been placed to attack the city if things don't turn around for it, and they scramble a few jets to look for people who went missing from Central Park. Good luck there, lads. They're all one congealed mess of slime. Aya rides the elevator to the roof and is ambushed by a giant spider woman. The boss designs for Parasite Eve are pretty evocative and interesting, but sometimes they just feel so out of place. Why is this here? There was no hints of a spider woman or anything as we made our way through the hospital. This just comes out of nowhere. Also, everything that we've fought so far makes sense. The alligator looked like a mutated alligator. The worms were giant worms. Shiva looked like a mutated form of Cerberus, the three-headed dog from Greek mythology. What is this? Is it a woman who mutated in a massively unfortunate way? Or is it a spider that grew a human-like appendage? The fight ends via the roof collapsing under the spider woman, and Eve arrives once again to mess with Aya. How is she going to do that this time? Well, she takes control of one of the jets, and has it start flying towards the hospital. Eve laments that she and Aya will never see eye to eye, and we have control back. Of course, I don't know where the game wants me to go, I head the wrong way, and So it's back to the last save point, fighting the Spider Woman again, and this time picking the right direction and ending up back on the ground where there's no sign that a jet just crashed into the roof. Cool. Things are looking bad. Eve's gotten away with the sperm sample. Daniel lets us know what he's found out about Clamp. A doctor was fired from the hospital for giving out a patient list, and it seems Melissa was seen going into the museum late at night on several occasions. The day ends with the group deciding it's time to go visit the museum. Looking at the map, however, we have two new places to visit, Chinatown and the warehouse. The warehouse is actually an optional area, so we'll start there. Really, the only interesting things at the warehouse are this walkway, because fighting on it is a complete pain due to the lack of space you have to dodge, and the boss, a giant crab. The crab takes reduced damage while its claws are still alive, so you want to kill those first. You always want to be at the sides of the crab so you can dodge this bubble breath attack, and sometimes its eyes will pop out and fire lasers that are pretty hard to dodge. And that's the warehouse. Surprisingly, no Eve here at all. We zip over to Chinatown next. We find Maida crouched near an open sewer cover with what looks like slime leading down into the hole. Maida gives us another useless charm before Aya heads down into the sewer. And this place is not fun at all. All of the screens basically look identical, they take an age to cross, there's a battle on pretty much every screen. One of the enemies here, the bats, can inflict darkness on Aya, meaning most of her shots will miss, which just prolongs the encounters. Ugh. Sewer levels in games are never good, but this one just isn't even close to being fun. Eventually we find our way through the maze of corridors and to this beautifully gooey sewer pump. Looks like we found the Central Park audience. We have to get the water shut off before this slime can infect the whole city. Thankfully, the room to do that is just at the top of the stairs. Fiddling with a few levers, we manage to shut the reservoir down, but the slime has other ideas as it bashes a hole in the roof. Before trying to progress onwards, make sure you flip the pump switch again, as Aya won't be able to cross the water if you didn't do that. Thanks, game. We're now in the subway system. Pretty cool. It's a straight line to get to where we need to go. There's some offshoots to get some loot, but at this point, you really don't need it. If you've been powering up your guns at all, then you'll be a force of death regardless of what you're carrying. The boss for this area is this centipede thing. It's actually a pretty cool fight. In its first phase, it's all one target, but after you've done enough damage to it, it splits into 4 and you have to kill each section. We're too powerful to die at this point due to all the healing we can pump out with our parasite energy, and the boss eventually goes down. At the end of the path, we find a cop who has a gate key on him, and Aya sees that the slime is heading towards the museum. This marks the end of the first disc. We make our way out of the subway using the gate key and over to the museum. This is our final dungeon and it's a complete maze. I spent a lot of time here aimlessly wandering around trying to find out where I had to go next. Your first goal is to get into Clamp's lab, but it's currently on lockdown, so you have to figure out how to get it open. At least the enemies here are rad mutated dinosaurs. Eventually we find our way to the main control room and shut off the alarm. And just for laughs, we decide to have a quick look at the camera bank. Eve's changed a bit. We now go to make our way over to Clamp's lab and... I apologize for every bad word I said about you, Parasite Eve. You are a perfect game and I love you. In Clamp's lab, Maida gives us a gun. It's a special gun apparently, and it will do something to Eve and the things she controls and creates. Time for a little bit of a load up. Clamp, much like the scientist from the Japan incident, had been culturing liver cells, and it seems like he had used Maya and Melissa in his experiments, although at this point we're not exactly certain how. And before we can figure it out, in Clamp comes. He reveals he's been working with Eve to create the ultimate being, and he offers himself as a sacrifice to kill Aya, Daniel and Maida. Daniel and Maida jump out of the window before Clamp immolates, and Aya is obviously fine because she has her special mitochondria. We grab his key from his body and set off to kill Eve. And once again, we're left to wander around with no indication of where to actually go. So we just walk around the maze-like museum until, and I kid you not, a Triceratops attacks us. We beat the Trike and hit a very important level, 33. We get a very special new parasite power called Liberate, and we'll see what that does very soon as the Trike knocks us down to the exhibition floor, where the T-Rex from before jumps down and starts another boss battle. Immediately, we try out the new Liberate power, and it's very clear that the difficulty curve of the game has gone. Liberate basically transforms us into Mitochondria Aya, and we get 7 pretty powerful hits in on the Rex. Yes, it uses all of our PE, but it fills up pretty quickly, and there's not a whole lot of enemies or bosses in the main game that can take 2 Liberates and live. We put the Rex down and explore the museum even more until we eventually find the heavily pregnant Eve. She calls the slime being forth, and it grabs her before we can kill her. In the car, Maida reveals that Melissa received a kidney transplant from Maya when she was a kid. Clamp had been using Maya's body to try and create Eve, and when the kidney was transplanted, those cells ended up in Melissa. The immunosuppressants that Melissa had been taking allowed Eve to finally take over. The Navy orders the jets to destroy the slime monster, but it doesn't work and most of the force are destroyed. A helicopter lands and takes Aya and the others to the Nimitz, the main vessel of the Navy fleet. They ask Aya to lead an operation to nuke the slime monster, to which she agrees. The other pilots sacrifice themselves so that Aya can get close enough to launch the blast. The blast scatters the slime monster over the Statue of Liberty, which falls to the ground. Aya parachutes down for a final confrontation with Eve. Eve states that the mitochondria have made a perfect environment and will now take over the planet, and the fight begins. Obviously, Liberate is used liberally in this fight. I do really like the fallen, corrupted Lady Liberty in the background. It's a nice bit of symbolism. Eve evolves one final time to start the second phase of the fight, but nothing can match up to the power of Liberate, and she falls pretty easily. As she dissolves into slime though, she gives Aya a final look, and it seems like things might not be quite finished. Back on the Nimitz, everyone is celebrating that the nightmare is over. We get given the option of naming some of our equipment, which will carry over to the New Game Plus mode, more on that later, and we get given some supplies and head back outside to hopefully return home. While the Navy is thanking Aya for her service, the ultimate being is finally born. Most of the Navy's fleet explodes due to the mitochondrial energy being out of control, and Aya refuses to escape via helicopter, knowing she's the only chance humanity has left. Maida tries to give Aya something, but Daniel suspects it's another useless talisman and drags him away. The ultimate being makes it to the boat, and our final boss fight begins. One Liberate pushes it to the next phase, where it evolves into a winged humanoid. Its third phase is the hardest of the 4 phases, but just keep your health high, pepper it with shots, and liberate away whenever you can. Also, the music for this phase really sounds like some of the Organization 13 music from Kingdom Hearts. Pretty cool to hear the origins of that whole theme. After this phase, the ultimate being evolves one final time into this weird form. Nothing we can do more than 1 or 2 damage, and it has a ton of health, so we're in for a long fight, right? Nope. After a few shots, we get a scene of Daniel and Maida in the helicopter. Maida says he was about to give Aya the bullets for his gun, but now it's probably too late. Daniel, being the absolute mega hero that he is, grabs the bullets, dives from the chopper, ignites on the way down, but still throws the clip to Aya. Now we can do some real damage to the ultimate being, and after a few of those shots, it goes down. But it's not over yet. We're now in a chase sequence, and if it touches us, we're dead. This is a mean section. There are a couple of points where you have multiple paths you can go down, but if you choose the wrong one, you won't have time to get back and will game over, sending you to back before the fight. The phone on the wall in the map room, by the way, that's bait. You can't save and it'll just waste time. We make it to the engine room and set the engine to blow. And here's where I messed up, big time. We climb the ladder and I thought I had to hold up to climb, so when the next screen loaded, I was still holding up. But there's something I haven't mentioned about Parasite Eve's control scheme. Some doors will be opened automatically when Aya walks into them, some of them require an interaction. This hatch is not one of the ones that requires you to interact with it. So I was holding up, the screen loaded, Aya went to open the hatch, the being popped out, and I bloody died. Bleh. So I killed the boss, again, went back through the ship, again, climbed up the ladder, not holding up this time. The escape went off without a hitch, and the ship explodes, taking the ultimate being with it. And we get the final reveal. Aya had a corneal transplant from Maya when she was younger. This is why her mitochondria are evolved. Aya's mitochondria evolved to live symbiotically with her nucleus, which is why her body isn't breaking down. Maida muses that humans are just parasites living on the Earth's body. And finally, the game ends as it began, with a night at the theatre. Thankfully, no one burns this time, and the performance seems to be a success. But as the opera singer starts to sing, Aya's mitochondria activate, turning her and most of the crowd's eyes purple. The consensus on what this ending means is up in the air. It's not canon because Parasite Eve 2 exists, but there's two schools of thought. One is that it's Aya's mitochondria telling the others that things are under control and not to rebel or they'll be put down, but I don't really like that theory. I'm a fan of the second theory, that the game was actually a battle between Eve's and Aya's mitochondria to see who was strong enough to rule the Earth. With Eve's mitochondria gone, there is nothing stopping Aya's mitochondria from taking over. It's a pretty bleak ending, but I feel like it fits in with the overall tone of the story more. So that's Parasite Eve. There's a new game plus option that has a randomized 77 floor mega dungeon with an alternate ending, but if I'm being honest, I didn't want to play through the game a second time back to back just to go through the Kaiser building for another non-canon ending. I love the game, but it takes a lot for me to immediately want to replay something. Parasite Eve is a super solid, if very basic game. I can echo the sentiments from earlier that it doesn't really have any replay value, but I think the length is pretty much perfect, clocking in at around 7 hours. There's some very, very fine for the time CGI work, the soundtrack is excellent, and it was nice to see Square step out of their comfort zone just a little bit. Highly recommended. If you've made it this far, thanks for watching. Consider dropping a sub so you don't miss me talking too much about games that I think are neat. I've been your Uncle Chaz, and I'll see you in the next one.